Hi, welcome back to Mountain Boys. Today for tips and tricks, we're going to do some deer hair spinning. So we're going to tie an Adams Irresistible here, but we're also going to do a quick tips and tricks video just for spinning the deer hair. So if you can, go with the largest thread you can get away with. This will help you keep from cutting your hair when you're spinning it. And always start with a decent thread wrap on your body to spin the deer hair onto. And we're going to start, you want to tie in your tail first, whatever type of tail material you're going to use. For this, I'm going to use some brown Hackle fibers. So I'm going to find myself a nice piece of brown saddle, some dry saddle Hackle here, and I'm going to strip off one of these feathers and cut off the fibers. The longest one you can probably find, so this will be some of your biggest feathers, and this is what we'll use as our tail. So there's a good one, and when you're doing this, pretty much just pull out the entire feather here and then, reuse this same feather for multiple flies. Again, like we've mentioned before, you don't want to get down into this part of the feather here, because this part of the feather on the lower end where the fibers get a little bit more splayed out and spread out, those fibers will actually hold and retain water. So you want to go with the longest ones you can that don't look like that. And I'm thinking, actually, these really nice dark ones right here look good. So I'm going to get a good clump of those, cut them off, pinch them together, and this is what we're going to use for the tail. Again, the tail, you don't want to be any longer than the shank of your hook, so probably about right there. So around, loose wrap, cinch up like that. Secure it well. You don't want to go too tight on your thread here, because you don't want these fibers to splay out too much. You want them to keep kind of nice together, about like that. So once that's set, I'm going to come in and trim off the excess at the front. And we're ready to spin the deer hair. And depending on the size of the fly you're tying and which fly you're tying, you might need to do 3 or maybe 2 or 3 bundles of spun hair. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up a little bit on my thread. So you never really want to get extend probably past about this point right here, probably about a little over halfway up the shank of your hook with your wraps, because we're also going to be tying in, wing posts up here and wing hackle, things like that. So you want to make sure you always keep your wraps back a little bit. And if I'm going to do 2 wraps on this, I'm going to space it out. So I'm going to do 1 wrap about here and another wrap probably about right there at the end of my thread wrap. So in fact, I'm going to go ahead and wrap forward on my thread a little bit more, so I'm not going to spin hair over just a bare hook perhaps. So I'm going to come back about right here. I'm going to lay my hair over, and I'm going to put the ends towards the back. So that'll also help with the taper of the fly, because the thinner ends of your hair stack will be towards the rear. So lay it on there, 1 wrap, gently tug, 2 wraps, a little bit tighter. Now the 3rd wrap, tightest yet that you can get it without cutting that hair. And now you might come in with your bodkin and pick out some of those that didn't spin through the hook. So there we go. There's one wrap. It's secure. Now, bring it back a little bit. And wrap forward. And we're going to lay in another bundle of hair. About the same amount that you had before, maybe just a little bit more. So, same routine. Cut it, stack it, get those fibers out of the hair until you can put it back on there. So we're going to stack. Nope, we had an errant hair there. That's all right. Get my bundle out. You can see the stacking really helps a lot of that stuff come out just on its own. So give it some flicks. That helps to separate it a little bit. And this is probably the longest, most involved process of these flies, is just cleaning out your hair. I wouldn't overlook this step because you'll find when you're out fishing, you might need to use a lot more dry shake or a lot more gink to get your flies to float on the water. That if you just spent a little bit more time prepping your hair, they might have floated a lot better. There we go. It's pretty good. I'm going to stack again. And spinner flies aren't really my favorite to tie at all. They make a mess of your tying station. They take forever to do. And if you mess up, you really have to go back and try to correct things, and they're no fun. I mean, they fish great sometimes, but is it always worth tying them? Yes and no. If you're good at it, I guess it doesn't matter too much, but if you're like me and you just don't tie a lot of these, they're kind of a pain in the butt. I prefer to use dubbing bodies whenever I can, just because the tying is a lot easier. I feel like you come out with a product that might fish as well, maybe not quite as well, but you don't have to put as much, I almost want to say futile effort into it, but it's not quite what I'm looking for. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stack again. Here we go. Okay. And these don't have to be perfectly stacked for a spinner because, or, for spun hair, because we're not as worried about all those ends being perfectly even. And we're going to trim them all anyway for the body, so it's just kind of a habit, and it's an easy way to help clean them out more than anything else. So I'm going to hold the first bit of spun hair back while I lay in the second here about halfway in my bundle. And first wrap is kind of loose as it starts to spin. Second gets a little tighter. And the third, the tightest yet. And some of the fibers and some of the hair might fall out. That's okay. You didn't catch all of them with the thread wrap. That's fine. So now I'm going to bring these all work my thread kind of the forward here, and I'm going to push that back a little bit further down the shaft of that hook so I have enough room to tie in my wing post and my front hackle. So that looks pretty good. Now it's just a matter of trimming. I'm going to start with my big scissors and start making a mess. You want to be careful too that you don't trim off the tail that you tied in earlier, so keep an eye on that, where that's at, and that's why it's nicer to have a darker color there on it so you can see it. And you also don't want to nip your thread because we haven't done anything to secure it here on the hook. You could have probably at least, thrown a half hitch or two around on the front to keep it from going places, but I didn't do that, so I'll just have to be extra careful while I'm trimming. So that's about all I feel like I'm going to get with the big scissors. And I'm going to step down to my smaller dull scissors that are good for trimming hair and trimming wire, things like that, things where I don't need them to be super sharp. So I can see where my tail is down there, and I'm going to try to come right above it and not actually trim off any of my tail. This is probably the one instance where having a rotating vise would be very beneficial and make it a lot easier. This is the only time and the only thing I do when I'm tying that I really wish I had a rotating vise, but that's okay. I can rotate it, I just have to unclamp it. Clamp it, yeah. Did anyone hear the banjos when I said clamp it? And I'll clamp it back in again that way. It's just not quite as convenient, but it still works. So, a lot of trimming going on, and that's what this fly is about. It's nothing but haircut. Oop, don't want to get the tail. So I'm bringing the blade of the scissors, and I'm pushing down the tail, and then I'm sliding it in right there so I don't hit it. And I went with gray number 8 thread on this size 12 hook because that was about the biggest I could get away with, or excuse me, the smallest I could get away with as far as thread, to not have to worry about cutting the hair, because if I'd used a size 6 thread, I couldn't have pulled that hair near as tight because I just would have cut it with the thread. So you can see we're starting to take shape here. And you want it to taper towards the back of the fly, so a little bit more material left up front than what's on back. And this fly was actually a request from a coworker to tie. I don't know that I would have done it without request. Generally with fly tying, you do it to have something to do, enjoy the hobby, and not have to spend money at a fly shop. But sometimes there are flies that for whatever reason you can't tie well, they're a real pain, or you just don't enjoy doing it as much, that buying those flies sometimes makes sense. And for me, this is one of those flies. But not to be completely dissuaded, I'll still attempt to tie them on occasion, even though my product may not be as good as what you could buy from the fly shop, and it'll take me a long time to do it. So there's definitely some kind of cost benefit thinking that needs to happen there. And for me, the benefit of this sometimes doesn't mesh up with the cost. So I end up buying Irresistibles whenever I need some in my box. So we're starting to take shape here. And you'll find you want to actually trim these down pretty close to the shaft of the hook, especially at the back, because that'll give it more of a natural looking body. And if you can be kind of uniform with the haircut here, it actually ends up looking pretty good. But again, this isn't my cup of tea. Oop, don't want to get the tail. So I'm still a little too big all the way around, and I need to shave it down. So just looking at this right now, I feel like maybe I should have done 3 bundle wraps or 3 sets of spinning on here, just because I feel like the very back is a little thin. Maybe I should have stacked a little bit more on the back, but I'll go for it. Boom. Got kind of a bulge right there on the back. There we go. There's some that need to get trimmed. And rotate your vise around a little bit so you're getting an even trim all around. It's also why you use gray thread, so just in case, like in this one, I have a little bit of the hair peeking out on the back, that it's camouflaged in there and you may not notice. And if you may not notice, the fish may not notice. Or they might, and you have to start fishing a different fly, because you're no good at tying Irresistibles with spun deer hair, and they're annoying. Oh, careful to keep my thread out of the way too while I'm doing this. And I'm a little heavier right there. Okay. There we go. There's just 1 or 2 of those little boogers at the back. And I'd say that's looking pretty good. You could try to get it a little finer than that if you wanted to, but I think that's okay. So I'm going to hold it back as much as I can here with my left hand, ow, as I poke myself with a hook. And I need to do some more thread wrap up front. Yeah, I think so. So now it's time to tie in a wing post. For this, you know, a lot of the old fly tying books and other things, they'll talk about using split 2 Grizzly Hackle tips coming up for the inner wing. Again, I find that's kind of a pain, so I just like to use some synthetic post material here. I'll cut off maybe about oh, let's kind of stretch it out. Maybe about 1.5 inches of this stuff. And I'm going to tie it in. There we go. Loose wrap. I'm going to cinch it up. Another wrap to secure. Now I'm going to twist it a little bit. Tie one that way. So what I'm going to end up doing here is actually splitting this into 2 wings. And once I get a wing how I want, I'm going to wrap around almost like I was doing a parachute here. And that's another style of fly that they float really well, but unless you tie a lot of parachutes, they can be kind of a pain to get the hang of. So there was one. Now I'm going to wrap the other. Stretch him out of the way. And you kind of just make a whoop. Tie back a little bit. Make little loops around them and pull them tight on each other as you go, and then sometimes it likes to spin off like that. So there are a lot of reasons why this fly in particular isn't one of my favorites to tie. So there we go. I've got a split wing now, and they're mostly separated. I'm going to tie in behind so that they stay forward. Just about like that. And I'm going to give them a quick manicure like that. And for this, you know, proportions on your wing, again, I wouldn't have them be any taller than the hook shank is long. So I'd kind of bring them back to about right here and trim them up, maybe just a skosh longer, because you can always make them shorter. You can't make them longer once you've trimmed them. So there we go. So there's our wing. And now we're ready to tie in our hackle. For this, Grizzly hackle and a brown hackle here. So tied in together. So I was looking through here. I'm going to try to find nice length dry hackle. Tie in. Here's one. And where did I put my Grizzly? Oh, there it is. And here's my Grizzly. And I'm going to grab a chunk of this too. Now this is saddle hackle, so neck hackle seems to work a little bit better for this because you really have to worry about those bottom halves of the feathers and how they will like to catch a lot of stuff too. And saddle hackle tends to just be really big. So I may cut right now and I may find some more appropriate hackle for this fly as I bump the tripod. So stand by and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. I found some hackle in my stash that I liked a little bit better. So you can see I got 2 big bundles of it and it's just a lot finer. The feathers themselves aren't coming to rounded tips. They're actually coming to pointed tips, and these are better ones to be using for your dry flies. So I found 2 pieces of hackle that were about the right size that I wanted, as far as stretching them over and, you know, length of fiber. So I'm going to go ahead and start tying in these. I'm going to give myself enough to work with here. So About like that. And about like that. So I might be a little bit more wasteful on my material with this fly because I'm, not as certain how much I'm going to need to do these wraps. And I also want to start a little bit further down on the hackle itself because that'll give me larger fibers possibly to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and strip out the ends here. And I'm going to orient them the same direction so that when we go to wrap, that they're going to want to wrap in the same way. So I'm going to split my wing post again, and I'm actually going to tie in, I'm going to put the center shaft of that hackle feather right in between the wings, so that'll also help separate them. So 2 wraps on the back. Now I'm going to come around the front there, grab them, secure them in, and bring my wing post back up. Now I'm just going to give it a test wrap here a little bit to see how much my wing is going to protrude above the hackle tips themselves. And actually I think that's about perfect. So I'm just going to continue wrapping. So I'm going to come in and do maybe 2 wraps, 3 wraps behind, maybe 2 wraps in front of that post. Secure them in, bring my thread to the back here, and now I'm going to snip these off. Well, I'm not going to snip, I'm just going to push. So I'm going to bring my scissors in, I'm going to make a point, and I'm just going to pop like that. So there we go. And you can see that I've pretty much entirely buried the eye on this hook. So that's why even when you think you have enough space on this fly, you might find that you don't. But we're going to try to get our whip finish in here anyway. So I'm going to give it one more wrap around if I can. I caught a few fibers there. I'm going to just trim these off so I have a little bit more room to work with my whip finish head. So there we go. Bring it in. A couple wraps. Secure it. Pop my thread. Again, I'm just coming in with that little V-notch there on my thread. Pop. And I'm going to manicure up the front of this fly a little bit as best I can. So I think we'll still be able to get our tippet through this fly. But it's going to be kind of tough because it's a little crowded up front, more than I would like. But this fly is still fishable. And I'm definitely going to fish this one because I went to the trouble to tie this one. I'm going to pull my hackle back a little bit too. And I can see I have a few fibers at the front. Let me zoom in some. You can see that there are a few fibers kind of crowding right underneath the eye there too. So I'm going to gently come in and manicure those off too. I really don't like to trim off and manicure hackle like this, but sometimes you have to. And pull my wings forward a little bit more, spread them out. There you go. there is size 12 Adams Irresistible with a synthetic wing and deer hair spun body and brown and grizzly hackle. So this is Mountain Boy, and I will see you next time on Fly of the Week.